The sea, vast, untamed, a creature of capricious moods. It could be a canvas of serenity, a mirror to the heavens, lulling men into a false sense of security, but it was also a beast, capable of unleashing fury that dwarfed the rage of any landlocked storm. It was this very duality that called to men like Captain Bartholomew Roberts, men who felt more alive with salt spray on their faces and the tang of the sea in their nostrils than they ever could on solid ground. For centuries, the open ocean had been a proving ground, a graveyard, and a source of endless fascination. It was a realm of myth and legend, where krakens lurked in the depths and mermaids lured sailors to their doom. Stories whispered in taverns, tales spun by firelight, spoke of ghost ships sailing the ether and sirens singing their seductive songs. These stories, passed down through generations of seafarers, were more than just tall tales. They were warnings, reminders of the ocean's power and the folly of underestimating its wrath. Captain Bartholomew Roberts was a man forged in the crucible of the sea. His weathered face, a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and salt-etched lines, spoke of countless voyages and encounters with the elements. His eyes, as blue and deep as the ocean itself, held a glint of steel, a reflection of the unwavering resolve that lay beneath his gruff exterior. Born into a life of poverty in the bustling port city of Bristol, England, Bartholomew yearned for escape from the grimy docks and overcrowded streets. The sea, with its promise of adventure and opportunity, called to him like a siren song. He began his seafaring life as a cabin boy, enduring the harsh realities of life aboard a merchant vessel, the backbreaking labor, the meager rations, the constant threat of storms and pirates. But Bartholomew persevered, his ambition fueled by a burning desire to rise above his humble beginnings. Years of toil and determination saw him climb the ranks. He learned the intricacies of navigation from grizzled old salts, mastered the art of seamanship under the watchful eyes of seasoned captains, and honed his leadership skills during harrowing encounters with storms, rival ships, and even the occasional band of pirates. By the time he earned his captain's commission, Bartholomew Roberts was a force to be reckoned with. A skilled navigator, a shrewd tactician, and a fearless leader who inspired both loyalty and trepidation in his crew. The air hung heavy with the smell of salt, tar, and impending rain. The sea, a vast expanse of churning water, seemed to mirror the turmoil in the sky above. Dark clouds gathered ominously, casting long shadows over the restless waves. The scent of the ocean was almost overpowering, a mix of brine and the promise of a storm. As Captain Roberts surveyed the bustling activity on the docks of Portsmouth, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and trepidation. The docks were alive with the sounds of men shouting, ropes creaking, and the constant clatter of cargo being loaded and unloaded. It was a symphony of organized chaos, a testament to the hard work and determination of the men who called this port home. The Lady Luck, her hull freshly painted and her sails billowing proudly in the stiff breeze, was ready for her maiden voyage under his command. She was a beauty, a ship built for speed and endurance, and Roberts had high hopes for her. The crew had worked tirelessly to prepare her for this journey, and now she stood ready, a testament to their dedication and skill. He adjusted his bicorn hat, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crew, his men a motley collection of weathered veterans and eager young deckhands, each with their own stories to tell and their own reasons for braving the perils of the open ocean. Some sought fortune, others adventure, and a few were simply running from their pasts. But today, they were united by a common purpose: to sail the Lady Luck into the unknown and return with tales of glory and riches. It was a day of contradictions, the sky a turbulent mix of storm clouds and fleeting patches of blue. The weather seemed to reflect the uncertainty that hung in the air, a constant reminder of the unpredictable nature of the sea. One moment, the sun would break through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the harbour, and the next, the sky would darken and the wind would pick up, sending shivers down the spines of those on the docks. Seagulls screeched overhead, their cries seeming to echo the anxieties that gnawed at the edges of the captain's mind. The birds, ever-present scavengers of the sea, seemed to sense the tension in the air. Their sharp calls were a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead, a chorus of warnings that only added to the captain's unease. He was not a superstitious man, not in the traditional sense, but even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him like a shroud. There were too many signs, too many omens that hinted at trouble. The sea, usually a source of comfort and familiarity, now seemed to hold a sense of menace. The captain's thoughts were a whirlwind of doubts and fears, each one more troubling than the last. Perhaps it was the unexpected croaking of a raven, a black speck against the leaden sky that had set his nerves on edge. Ravens were often seen as harbingers of doom, and their presence was rarely a good sign. The bird's harsh cries seemed to pierce the air, a stark contrast to the usual sounds of the harbour. It was as if the raven was trying to warn them of the dangers that lay ahead. Or perhaps it was the way a mirror shattered in his cabin when a rogue wave struck the ship, an event that had left him feeling unsettled. Mirrors were said to hold a piece of one's soul, and the breaking of one was often seen as an ill omen. The shards of glass had scattered across the floor, reflecting the dim light in 1,000 fractured images. It was a sight that had stayed with him, a constant reminder of the fragility of their situation. But a sense of foreboding hung in the air, as palpable as the approaching storm. The clouds continued to gather, dark and menacing, and the wind began to howl through the rigging. It was as if the very elements were conspiring against them, a force of nature that could not be ignored. The captain knew that they were in for a rough journey, and he could only hope that they would make it through unscathed. As the Lady Luck slipped her moorings and began her journey westward, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. It was a breathtaking sight, a moment of beauty in an otherwise tense day. The colours of the sunset seemed to reflect the emotions of the crew, a mix of hope and fear, excitement and dread. The ship moved gracefully through the water, her sails catching the last rays of the sun as she set out on her voyage. The wind, which had been a steady companion throughout the day, shifted abruptly, becoming a biting, unpredictable force that whipped at the sails and sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned sailors. The change in the wind was sudden and unexpected, a reminder of the capricious nature of the sea. The crew struggled to adjust the sails, their movements quick and practiced. But there was an underlying tension in their actions. They knew that the storm was coming, and they could only hope that they were prepared for it. Captain Roberts stood at the helm, his jaw set, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon, his every sense alert for the first sign of the storm that threatened to engulf them. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, the lives of his crew resting in his hands. The sea was a fickle mistress, and he knew that they would need all their skill and courage to navigate the challenges ahead. As the first drops of rain began to fall, he took a deep breath and steeled himself for the journey that lay ahead. The sun dipped below the horizon, a fiery orb swallowed by the churning maw of the approaching storm clouds. What had begun as a stiff breeze escalated rapidly, transforming into a howling gale that ripped at the sails and sent spray high over the mainmast. The Lady Luck, her sleek lines no match for the raw power of the elements, pitched and rolled violently, her timbers groaning under the relentless assault. Captain Roberts, his face illuminated by the eerie glow of the binnacle lamp, gripped the helm with the strength of 10 men, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the compass. He barked orders over the roar of the wind and the crashing waves, his voice a gruff counterpoint to the symphony of chaos that surrounded them. The crew, seasoned sailors though they were, moved with a frantic urgency, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and grim determination. The storm, as if sensing their vulnerability, unleashed its full fury. Waves towering mountains of water with crests like jagged teeth slammed into the Lady Luck, each impact threatening to splinter the ship into 1,000 pieces. Rain, driven by the wind, lashed down in blinding sheets, transforming the deck into a swirling maelstrom. The air, thick with the smell of salt and ozone, crackled with an almost tangible energy, a sense of impending doom that settled over the crew like a shroud. Hour after hour, the battle between man and nature raged on. The Lady Luck, her rigging singing a mournful song as the wind tore through her sails, fought tooth and nail against the relentless onslaught. Captain Roberts, his face now streaked with rain and seawater, remained a steadfast presence at the helm, his every instinct honed by years at sea, guiding the ship through the treacherous waves. The crew, their oilskins slick with rain and their bodies aching with fatigue, worked tirelessly to keep the ship afloat. They wrestled with the massive canvas sails, their hands raw and bleeding, struggling to maintain control as the wind threatened to rip the masts from their moorings. Men were tossed about the deck like rag dolls, their cries lost in the roar of the storm. One unfortunate soul, swept overboard by a rogue wave, disappeared into the churning abyss, his screams swallowed by the relentless fury of the sea. Below deck, the scene was no less chaotic. The ship's doctor, a man more accustomed to treating scurvy and gunshot wounds than seasickness, tended to the injured, his meagre supplies dwindling with each passing hour. The cook, his galley transformed into a treacherous obstacle course of shifting pots and pans, struggled to prepare a hot meal for the exhausted crew, his efforts often thwarted by the violent rocking of the ship. Fear, palpable and suffocating, permeated every corner of the Lady Luck, threatening to extinguish the last vestiges of hope. The hold of the Lady Luck was a symphony of creaking timbers, groaning ropes, and the frantic scurrying of rats fleeing the rising seawater. The lantern swung precariously from the ceiling, casting long dancing shadows that amplified the terror etched on the faces of the men huddled below. Each groan of the ship, each thunderous crash of the waves against the hull, sent shivers down their spines. Young Thomas, a cabin boy on his first voyage, clung to his father, a grizzled boatswain with eyes that had seen too much of the sea's wrath. The boy buried his face in his father's rain-soaked coat, trying to block out the sounds of the storm and the prayers and curses of the men around him. He had heard the tales, whispered in hushed tones around the docks back in Portsmouth, tales of ships swallowed whole by the sea, of krakens with tentacles as thick as masts, of sirens who lured sailors to their deaths with their enchanting voices. Now, trapped in the belly of the storm, those tales seemed less like fantasy and more like horrifying premonitions. Old Silas, the ship's carpenter, a man whose gnarled hands were as familiar with the grain of the Lady Luck as they were with his own weathered skin, muttered prayers under his breath, his rosary beads clicking a frantic rhythm against the wooden chest that held his meagre possessions. He had weathered many storms in his lifetime, but this felt different. This storm had a malevolence, a hunger that chilled him to the bone. Nightfall brought no respite. If anything, the storm intensified, its fury amplified by the inky blackness that enveloped the ship. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping the sails into a frenzy and sending spray so high that it stung the faces of the men huddled on deck. The rain, now a torrent of icy needles, hammered down with relentless force, blurring vision and making every movement a treacherous gamble. Time lost all meaning as the crew fought for survival. The hours blurred into an endless cycle of bone-jarring crashes, ear-splitting roars, and the ever-present fear of being swallowed whole by the raging sea. Men prayed to whatever gods they believed in, their pleas lost in the cacophony of the storm. Some wept openly, their tears mingling with the rain and seawater. Others, their faces masks of stoic resignation, simply clung to the rigging, their knuckles white, their eyes wide with terror. Captain Roberts, his body aching with fatigue, his spirit tested as never before, refused to yield. He stood at the helm, a beacon of defiance against the fury of the elements, his voice hoarse but unwavering as he barked orders to his exhausted crew. He knew that the Lady Luck, battered and bruised though she was their only lifeline, their only hope of escape from this watery hell. Section 5. The eye of the storm, a moment of eerie calm, and then just as suddenly as it began, the storm abated. The wind, as if exhausted from its own fury, died down to a gentle breeze. The rain, which had been lashing the deck with unrelenting force, dwindled to a fine mist, then ceased altogether. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon, its pale light casting an eerie glow upon the ravaged deck of the Lady Luck. An almost unnatural silence descended, broken only by the creaking of the ship's timbers and the gentle lapping of water against the hull. The crew, their bodies still tense with adrenaline, their ears still ringing from the roar of the storm, stared at one another in disbelief, their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Captain Roberts, his eyes narrowed against the moonlight, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his cutlass, knew that this tranquility was deceptive. He had seen it before, this eerie calm at the heart of the storm, and he knew that it was often a prelude to an even more ferocious onslaught. He turned to his first mate, a burly man with a scar that bisected his left eye, and barked, "Get the men below deck, Mr. Jones. We need to batten down the hatches and prepare for the worst. This storm's not done with us yet." Section 1. The sea's unnatural stillness, a growing sense of dread. The eye of the storm held a different kind of terror. Gone was the deafening roar of the wind, the relentless pounding of the waves. An unnatural stillness had descended upon the Lady Luck, a silence so profound that it seemed to press down on the ears, amplifying every creak of the ship's timbers, every rustle of canvas. The air itself felt heavy, thick with an unseen tension, a sense of anticipation that sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned sailors. The crew, their faces drawn and haggard after their ordeal, emerged from below deck with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They moved about the ravaged deck with a cautious uncertainty, their voices hushed, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, as if expecting some unseen menace to emerge from the depths at any moment. The sea, usually a restless, ever-changing entity, lay eerily calm, its surface a vast, unbroken mirror reflecting the swirling vortex of storm clouds above. Captain Roberts, his face grim, his gaze fixed on the horizon, felt a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He had seen this before, this unnatural calm after the storm, and he knew that it often presaged something far more sinister. There was a wrongness to the stillness, a palpable sense of dread that hung in the air like the stench of decay. It was as if the sea itself were holding its breath, gathering its strength for another, more devastating assault. Section 2. Strange occurrences, on-deck illusions, or something more. As the eerie calm stretched on, a series of strange occurrences began to plague the Lady Luck. Objects moved inexplicably across the deck, seemingly of their own volition. Shadows flickered in the corners of the men's vision, only to vanish when approached. Whispers, faint and indistinct, drifted down from the crow's nest, only to be dismissed as the ravings of an exhausted lookout. One moment, young Thomas, the cabin boy, swore he saw a face staring up at him from a bucket of seawater, its features contorted in a silent scream. The next, it was gone, leaving only ripples on the surface of the water. He rubbed his eyes, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had seen with the rational world he knew, but the image remained burned into his mind's eye. Old Silas, the ship's carpenter, reported hearing his name called out in the dead of night, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to emanate from the very timbers of the ship. He searched high and low, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the deserted deck, but found no sign of another soul. The crew, already on edge after their brush with death, grew increasingly agitated. Whispers of sea ghosts and malevolent spirits began to circulate, their words laced with fear and superstition. Even the most hardened veterans found themselves looking over their shoulders, their senses heightened, their minds playing tricks on them in the oppressive silence. Section 3. The Watchman's Tale. A glimpse of the unexplained. It was during the graveyard watch, when the moon hung low in the sky and shadows stretched long and menacing across the deck, that the watchman, a grizzled veteran named Ben, saw it. He'd been at his post for hours, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind numbed by the oppressive silence and the unnerving stillness of the sea. At first he thought it was just another trick of the light, a phantom wave breaking the glassy surface of the water. But as he watched, his heart pounding in his chest, a sense of icy dread creeping up his spine, he realized that it was something else entirely. It rose slowly from the depths, a dark, undulating mass that seemed to stretch on forever. Tentacles, thick as tree trunks and studded with rows of glistening suckers, broke the surface of the water, their tips dripping with a viscous, phosphorescent slime. A single baleful eye, as large as a ship's lantern, opened in the centre of the mass, its gaze fixed upon the Lady Luck, its pupil a slit of pure black malice. Ben stumbled back from the railing, his breath catching in his throat, his mind reeling from the sheer immensity and horror of what he had just witnessed. He fumbled for his whistle, his fingers trembling so violently that he could barely grasp it. Finally, he managed to blow a shrill blast, the sound piercing the unnatural silence like a scream in the night. Section 4. Whispers of sea monsters, legends of the deep resurface. The watchman's frantic cries echoed across the deck of the Lady Luck, shattering the eerie calm and sending a jolt of adrenaline through the exhausted crew. Men scrambled from their bunks, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear, their hands instinctively reaching for cutlasses and pistols. Captain Roberts, his face grim, his hand resting on the hilt of his cutlass, stormed onto the deck, his voice booming across the ship. "Report! What in God's name is the meaning of this commotion?" Ben, his face ashen, his voice trembling with terror, pointed a shaking finger towards the horizon. "Kraken, Captain! It's the Kraken!" A collective gasp rippled through the crew, followed by a flurry of hushed whispers. Legends of the Kraken, a monstrous sea creature of immense size and power, had been passed down through generations of sailors, often dismissed as tall tales meant to frighten young deckhands. But here, on this becalmed sea, under a sky still bruised with the remnants of the storm, those legends were taking on a terrifying reality. Section 1. Beacons of False Hope, the eerie allure of distant lighthouses. Days turned into nights, the endless expanse of the sea stretching before them like a vast, watery grave. The encounter with the Kraken had shaken the crew of the Lady Luck to their core, leaving them with a lingering sense of dread, a constant fear that the depths held other equally monstrous creatures just waiting for the chance to drag them down into the abyss. Then, one night, as the moon hid behind a veil of storm clouds, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. A lighthouse. Its beam, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness, pulsed with an eerie rhythm, cutting through the fog like a lifeline cast out to a drowning man. Whispers rippled through the exhausted crew, a mixture of relief and trepidation. Land. After weeks at sea, battered by storms and terrorized by creatures of the deep, the very idea of solid ground beneath their feet seemed like a dream. But the lighthouse, its light flickering unnaturally in the fog, held an unsettling quality, an almost spectral aura that did little to calm their frayed nerves. Captain Roberts, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes gleaming with a newfound determination, studied the distant light through his spyglass. Lighthouses were more than just navigational aids. They were symbols of civilization, of safety, of the enduring spirit of man in the face of nature's fury. But this one, its beam wavering as if alive, sent a shiver down his spine. Section 2. Charting a course towards the shifting glow in the distance. "Mr. Jones," Captain Roberts barked, his voice raspy but commanding, "chart a course towards that light, and be sharp about it." The first mate, his face still bearing the scars of their encounter with the Kraken, nodded curtly and bent over the ship's charts, his brow furrowed in concentration. The light, its position seeming to shift with the swirling fog, proved difficult to pinpoint with any accuracy. "Captain," Mr. Jones said, his voice laced with uncertainty, "that light, it doesn't seem to correspond with any charted lighthouse in these waters. We're miles off course, sir." Captain Roberts, his gut churning with unease, raised his spyglass once more, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The fog, thick and swirling, played tricks on the eyes, making distances impossible to gauge, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous apparitions. He had sailed these waters for years, and he knew that there were no charted islands, no known lighthouses, for hundreds of nautical miles in this direction. "Mark my words, Mr. Jones," Captain Roberts said, his voice low and grave. "There's something unnatural about that light. Something ain't right." Section 3. A change in the air trepidation grips the crew. As the Lady Luck crept cautiously through the fog, guided by the ethereal glow of the lighthouse, a palpable sense of unease settled over the ship. The air, thick and heavy, seemed to hum with an unseen energy, a feeling of being watched, of being drawn inexorably towards some unknown fate. The crew, their initial relief at the sight of land replaced by a growing sense of trepidation, moved about the deck with a subdued urgency, their voices hushed, their eyes darting nervously towards the swirling fog. Even the most hardened veterans, men who had faced down storms and sea monsters without flinching, couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Old Silas, the ship's carpenter, swore that the sea itself had fallen silent, its usual symphony of crashing waves and whistling wind replaced by an unsettling stillness. Young Thomas, the cabin boy, his imagination fueled by the tales he had heard whispered below deck, claimed to see shadowy figures moving in the fog, their forms shifting and dissolving like smoke. Section 4. Land ahoy, not salvation, but a shroud of mystery. As the first rays of dawn pierced the swirling fog, the island revealed itself. It rose from the sea like a jagged tooth, its cliffs shrouded in mist, its shoreline a treacherous labyrinth of jagged rocks and churning surf. The lighthouse, perched precariously on the highest point of the island, now loomed large, its beams still pulsing with that same eerie rhythm that had both beckoned them and filled them with dread. "Lord save us," Mr. Jones breathed, his voice barely audible above the creaking of the ship's timbers. "It looks like something out of a nightmare." Captain Roberts, his face grim, said nothing. He raised his spyglass once more, his gaze sweeping over the island, taking in every detail. There were no signs of life, no welcoming lights in the windows of distant houses, no smoke rising from chimneys. Just the relentless pounding of the surf against the rocks and the mournful cry of unseen birds circling overhead. The island, for all its desolate beauty, exuded an aura of menace, a palpable sense of wrongness that sent shivers down the spines of the men who beheld it. It was as if the island itself were a living thing, watching them, judging them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The Lady Luck, her sails luffing gently in the breeze, circled the island cautiously, her crew on high alert. The fog, though thinning, still clung to the island like a shroud, obscuring its secrets, amplifying the sense of unease that had settled over the ship. "There's no record of any island in this area, Captain," Mr. Jones said, his voice tight with apprehension, his finger tracing a blank space on the ship's chart. "It's as if it's uncharted." Captain Roberts, his gut churning with a mixture of curiosity and dread, nodded slowly. He had heard tales of phantom islands, places that existed on no map, that appeared and disappeared at whim, often luring unsuspecting sailors to their doom. But he had always dismissed such stories as nautical folklore, the product of overactive imaginations and too much rum. Now, as he gazed upon this nameless, uncharted island, its cliffs shrouded in mist, its lighthouse pulsing with an unnatural light, he was not so sure. There was something undeniably strange about this place, something that defied logic and reason, something that whispered of ancient secrets and forgotten horrors. As the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, casting long, grotesque shadows across the deck of the Lady Luck, a new sound reached their ears. It began as a low, mournful wail, carried on the breeze like the cry of a wounded animal. But as the light faded, the sound grew in intensity, transforming into a chorus of screams, high-pitched and filled with an unspeakable terror that sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened sailors. The crew, their faces ashen, their eyes wide with terror, huddled together on deck, their gazes fixed on the island, their imaginations running wild. Some whispered of banshees, their cries heralding imminent death. Others spoke of tortured souls, their screams echoing through the centuries. Captain Roberts, his face grim, his jaw clenched tight, refused to give in to panic. He had faced down storms, sea monsters and mutinies in his time, but this was something different. This was something that struck at the very core of his being, something that spoke to a primal fear he didn't even know he possessed. The silence of the cursed island was broken, but by a sound far more primal, far more threatening. A low rhythmic thumping carried on the wind, drifted across the water, a sound that spoke of power, of aggression. Drums. Captain Roberts, his weathered face hardening, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his cutlass, felt a knot of dread tighten in his gut. He knew that sound. He had heard it before. Predator stalking its prey. It was the sound of pirates. "Mr. Jones!" Captain Roberts barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Muster the men! Battle stations! We have company, and it's not the welcoming committee!" The crew, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and grim determination, sprang into action. Loaded cannons were manned. The Lady Luck battered a fight. The fog, as if conspiring with their attackers, seemed to thicken, swallowing the light, amplifying the sense of claustrophobia, of being hunted. The rhythmic thudding of the drums grew louder, closer, accompanied now by the faint sound of shouting, of orders being barked in a language Captain Roberts recognized all too well. Then, through a swirling veil of mist, they saw it. A ship, its hull as black as pitch, its sails billowing like the wings of a monstrous bat, emerged from the fog, its bow, a menacing silhouette against the fading light. It was a pirate ship, sleek and deadly built for speed and aggression, its decks teeming with men armed to the teeth. Panic rippled through the crew of the Lady Luck, a wave of fear that threatened to break their already fragile morale. They had survived storms, sea monsters and the horrors of the island, but against a well-armed pirate ship, their chances seemed slim at best. Captain Roberts, his voice a beacon of defiance in the growing darkness, bellowed, "Hold fast, men! Show no fear! We've faced worse than these scurvy dogs, and we'll come through this as well. Now man your stations and prepare to repel boarders for the Lady Luck." The pirate ship, its prow adorned with a grotesque figurehead, a snarling wolf with blood dripping from its fangs, slashed through the water, closing the distance with terrifying speed. A cannon roared, the sound echoing across the water like a death knell. And a ball ripped through the Lady Luck's rigging, sending splintered wood and shredded canvas raining down on the deck. A cheer, savage and bloodthirsty, rose from the throats of the pirates, and above their heads a flag snapped in the wind, a black field emblazoned with a skull and crossbones, the unmistakable symbol of piracy, of death, of the merciless brutality of the sea. The Jolly Roger. Fear, primal and suffocating, gripped the hearts of the Lady Luck's crew. They were outgunned, outmanned, and facing an enemy that knew no mercy, that fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves. "Fire!" Captain Roberts roared, his voice hoarse with defiance, and the Lady Luck answered with a thunderous broadside of her own. The cannons recoiled, their roar shaking the ship to its core, and a cloud of acrid smoke enveloped the deck, momentarily obscuring the pirates from view. The respite was short-lived. The pirate ship, its hull scarred but intact, rammed the Lady Luck with bone-jarring force, its grappling hooks snagging the rigging, pulling the two ships together in a deadly embrace. Pirates, their faces a horrifying mix of battle lust and greed, swarmed over the rails, their cutlasses and pistols flashing in the fading light. The air filled with the clang of steel on steel, the roar of pistols, the screams of the wounded and the dying. The crew of the Lady Luck, outnumbered but not outmatched in courage, fought back with the ferocity of desperate men. They parried thrusts, fired their pistols point blank, and swung their cutlasses with bone-crushing force, their cries of defiance echoing across the blood-soaked deck. Captain Roberts, a whirlwind of fury, his cutlass a blur of silver in the fading light, carved a path through the heart of the boarding party. He fought with the cold fury of a man defending not just his ship, but his life, his crew, his very soul. Section 5. The Captain's Defiance, a cutlass gleaming under a black flag. A towering figure, his face hidden behind a grotesque mask fashioned from a human skull, emerged from the throng of pirates. He moved with an almost unnatural grace, his cutlass, a wickedly curved blade that seemed to drink the fading light, held loosely in his gloved hand. This was the pirate captain, a figure of dread whispered about in taverns and feared throughout the seven seas. Their eyes met across the blood-soaked deck, two predators sizing each other up, their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. "You fight like a man possessed, Captain," the pirate captain rasped, his voice a chilling whisper from behind the skull mask. "But it's a fight you cannot win. Surrender your ship, your cargo and your lives, and I'll grant you a clean death." Captain Roberts spat a mouthful of blood onto the deck, his gaze unwavering. "The Lady Luck may be yours, pirate, but you'll pry her from my cold, dead hands. And as for my crew and I, we've stared death in the face before and we don't scare easily. We'll fight you to our last breath." Section 6. Blood on the Deck, the brutal reality of cutlass and pistol. The clash when it came was brutal. The two captains, their cutlasses flashing in the fading light, moved with a speed and ferocity that defied belief. Sparks showered the deck as steel met steel. The air filled with the clang of their blades, the thud of bodies colliding, the gasps and groans of men fighting for their lives. Around them the battle raged on, a chaotic whirlwind of cutlass and pistol, of blood and thunder. Men fell, their cries cut short as they were trampled underfoot, their lifeblood staining the deck crimson. The air grew thick with the stench of gunpowder, sweat and fear. Captain Roberts, his strength failing, his breath coming in ragged gasps, knew he was fighting a losing battle. His cutlass arm ached, his body screamed for respite, but still he fought on, driven by a primal need to protect his crew, to deny these sea devils the satisfaction of an easy victory. Section 7. A fiend in human form. The pirate captain's reign of terror. The pirate captain, his movements as swift and deadly as a striking cobra, disarmed Captain Roberts with a flick of his wrist. The Lady Luck's captain stumbled back, his cutlass clattering uselessly across the deck, his chest heaving with exertion. "You fought bravely, old man," the pirate captain said, his voice a low growl behind the skull mask. "But bravery alone is a poor weapon against superior steel." He pressed the point of his cutlass against Captain Roberts' throat, the cold steel sending a shiver down his spine. "Now tell me, where do you keep your valuables? Give them to me, and I might yet allow you and your crew to live to see another sunrise." Captain Roberts spat a mouthful of blood at the pirate captain's feet. "You'll find no treasure here, pirate. Only the cold, hard truth. that some things are worth more than gold. We may go down with our ship, but we go down fighting, we go down free. The pirate captain laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed across the ravaged deck like the cry of a carrion bird. So be it, he hissed, his grip tightening on his cutlass. You've chosen death over dishonor. I can respect that. But death can be a fickle mistress. Sometimes she's swift, sometimes she lingers, savoring the pain of her victims. Section 8. Plunder and Despair, Stripping the Lady Luck Bare. With Captain Roberts subdued, the remaining crew of the Lady Luck, their spirits broken, their bodies weary from the fight, were quickly overwhelmed. The pirates, their thirst for blood slaked, turned their attention to plunder, ransacking the ship with ruthless efficiency. They tore through cabins, smashed open chests, and ripped apart cargo holds, their laughter echoing through the ravaged ship, a mocking counterpoint to the groans of the wounded and the sobs of those who had lost more than just their possessions in the fight. The Lady Luck, once a proud vessel, her sails billowing with the promise of adventure, now lay ravaged and bare, her decks stained with blood, her holds emptied, her spirit broken. Even the ship's bell, its bronze gleaming dully in the fading light, was not spared, ripped from its moorings and added to the pirates' growing horde. Section 9, A Fate Worse Than Death, marooned on the Island of Screams. The pirate captain, his skull mask gleaming in the moonlight, his boots crunching on the sand, approached the huddled figures of Captain Roberts and his surviving crew. They had been stripped of their weapons, their possessions, their dignity, and dumped unceremoniously on the shores of the very island they had hoped to escape. "Enjoy your stay, gentlemen," the pirate captain said, his voice laced with amusement. "The accommodations are a bit rustic, but I'm sure you'll find a way to make yourselves comfortable. Or not," he laughed, a chilling sound that echoed across the desolate beach, and turned on his heel, heading back towards his waiting ship. Captain Roberts, his body aching, his spirit heavy with defeat, watched as the pirate ship, its black sails billowing like the wings of a monstrous bird of prey, melted into the fog, leaving them stranded, alone, at the mercy of an island that seemed to pulsate with unseen horrors. Section 10. A glimmer of hope. One last shot at survival. Despair threatened to engulf Captain Roberts. He had faced down storms, sea monsters, and even the dread Kraken, but this felt different. This felt final. He looked at the faces of his remaining crew, their eyes reflecting the same fear, the same uncertainty that gnawed at his own soul. They were exhausted, wounded, broken in body and spirit, but they were alive, and as long as they drew breath, there was hope. "Mr. Jones," Captain Roberts said, his voice raspy but firm, his hand resting on the first mate's shoulder, "help me up, would you? It seems fate has dealt us a cruel hand, but we're not done yet. We've survived worse than this, and by God, we'll survive this too. This island may be our prison, but it may also be our salvation. We'll find a way off this cursed rock, even if it's the last thing we do." Nightfall descended upon the island, casting long, menacing shadows that danced and writhed like living things. The screams, which had momentarily ceased during the chaos of the pirate attack, resumed with renewed fury, their chilling chorus echoing across the desolate landscape, a constant reminder of their isolation, their vulnerability. Captain Roberts, his back against a jagged rock, his cutlass clutched tightly in his hand, scanned their surroundings, his senses on high alert. The pirates may have taken their ship, their possessions, their dignity, but they had not taken their will to survive. He would not allow his crew to succumb to despair, not while there was a breath left in their bodies. He had built a fire, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness, its flames casting a flickering, uncertain light that did little to dispel the shadows that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The crew, Their faces haggard, their bodies shivering with cold and fear, huddled close to the warmth, their eyes darting nervously at the rustling undergrowth, their imaginations conjuring up unseen horrors in the night. Mr. Jones, his voice a hoarse whisper, spoke, his words barely audible above the crackling fire and the chilling chorus of screams. "Captain, how long can we survive out here? What chance do we have?" Captain Roberts, his gaze fixed on the flames, their dance mirroring the turmoil in his own soul, drew a deep breath. He had no answers, not anymore. He had always prided himself on his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the sea, to chart a course through the darkest storms. But here, on this God-forsaken island, he felt adrift, lost, at the mercy of forces he could neither understand nor control. As the night wore on, the fire dwindled, its cheerful crackle fading to a soft hiss as the last of the driftwood turned to ash. The darkness deepened, pressing in on them, amplifying the whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air they breathed. Whispers that spoke of madness, of despair, of the futility of hope. Captain Roberts, his body aching with fatigue, his mind teetering on the edge of exhaustion, felt his resolve waver. For the first time in his long and storied career at sea, he allowed himself to confront the possibility of defeat, of death, not from the fury of the elements or the brutality of pirates, but from the insidious, soul-crushing despair that seemed to permeate this accursed island. He thought of his crew, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. They had followed him into the heart of the storm, had faced down sea monsters and pirates at his side, had placed their trust in his judgment, his experience, his ability to lead them to safety. And what did he have to show for it? A plundered ship, a deserted island, a chorus of screams that promised nothing but madness and death. A sob escaped his lips, a sound of utter defeat, of a spirit finally broken. He had failed them. He had led them to their doom. Dawn arrived, not with the glorious burst of colour and light that Captain Roberts had always associated with the sunrise at sea, but with a gradual lifting of the darkness, a slow bleed of grey into the black, as if the island itself were reluctant to relinquish its grip on the night. The sky, usually a canvas of vibrant hues, was now a sombre palette of greys and muted blues, reflecting the desolation that had settled in the hearts of the shipwrecked crew. The mist clung to the island like a shroud, wrapping it in an eerie silence that was only broken by the distant cries of seabirds. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, a reminder of the countless lives that had been claimed by these treacherous waters. As the first pale rays of light pierced the swirling mist, they revealed a landscape that was both haunting and beautiful, a place where life and death seemed to coexist in a delicate balance. Captain Roberts, his eyes heavy with fatigue and unshed tears, noticed something lying at the edge of the tree line. His heart, which had been weighed down by despair, now beat with a renewed sense of urgency. He squinted through the mist, trying to make out the shape that lay ahead. Was it a mirage, a cruel trick played by his exhausted mind? Or was it something real, something that could offer them a glimmer of hope in this forsaken place? He stumbled towards it, his legs stiff and sore from their ordeal, his heart pounding in his chest, a flicker of hope igniting in the ashes of his despair. Each step was a struggle, his body protesting against the effort, but he pushed on, driven by a desperate need to find something, anything, that could help them survive. The sand shifted beneath his feet, making his progress slow and arduous, but he refused to give up. It was a ship, or rather, what was left of one. Its timbers, bleached white by the sun and salt, were scattered across the beach like the bones of some prehistoric beast. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a stark reminder of the power of the sea and the fragility of human endeavour. The ship, once a proud vessel that had braved the open ocean, was now a mere skeleton, its glory days long past. Its masts were broken, its sails ripped to shreds, its once proud figurehead now a rotting, unrecognizable lump of wood. The ship, Captain Roberts realized with a growing sense of dread, was the source of the screams. The cries of the lost souls who had perished in these waters seemed to echo through the wreckage, a haunting reminder of the island's deadly allure. The ship, Captain Roberts realized with a growing sense of dread, was the source of the screams. The cries of the lost souls who had perished in these waters seemed to echo through the wreckage, a haunting reminder of the island's deadly allure. It was as if the island itself was alive, feeding on the despair and suffering of those who had been lured to its shores. It was the wreckage of countless voyages, a testament to the island's deadly allure, a grim reminder that they were not the first, nor would they be the last, to meet their end on these cursed shores. The beach was littered with the remains of ships from different eras, each one telling a story of hope, adventure, and ultimately tragedy. The island was a graveyard of dreams, a place where the sea claimed its due with ruthless efficiency. And yet, amidst the wreckage, Captain Roberts saw not just death, but the possibility of life. For amongst the splintered timbers, the tangled rigging, and the rotting canvas, he found tools. Axes, hammers, saws, all bearing the patina of age and the corrosion of salt water, but still functional, still capable of serving a purpose. The island, it seemed, was offering them a grim gift, a chance to build their salvation from the bones of those who had perished before them. The tools were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Captain Roberts knew that they would need to work together, to pool their resources and skills if they were to survive. The island had taken so much from them, but it had also given them a chance, however slim, to fight back. The crew, weary and battered, gathered around the wreckage, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. They began to salvage what they could, carefully extracting the tools from the wreckage and assessing their condition. Each tool was a precious resource, a potential means of survival. The axes could be used to fell trees for shelter, the hammers and saws to build structures, the ropes and rigging to create makeshift fishing lines. The island, with its abundance of natural resources, offered them a chance to rebuild, to create a new life from the remnants of the old. As they worked, a sense of camaraderie began to develop among the crew. They were no longer just survivors of a shipwreck. They were a team, united by a common goal. The island, with all its dangers and mysteries, had brought them together in a way that nothing else could. They shared stories of their past lives, their hopes and dreams, and their fears for the future. In the face of adversity, they found strength in each other. The days turned into weeks, and the crew slowly began to adapt to their new reality. They built shelters from the timbers of the wrecked ships, fashioned tools and weapons from the debris, and learned to forage and fish for food. The island, once a place of despair, became a place of hope and resilience. Captain Roberts, who had once been consumed by grief and guilt, found a renewed sense of purpose. He became a leader, guiding his crew through the challenges they faced and helping them to build a new life. The island, it seemed, was offering them a grim gift, a chance to build their salvation from the bones of those who had perished before them. It was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place of opportunity. The crew, once lost and broken, found a new sense of hope and determination. They were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers, forging a new path in an unforgiving world. As they looked out over the horizon, the crew knew that their journey was far from over. The island had given them a second chance, but it was up to them to make the most of it. They would face many more challenges, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had the tools they needed to survive. The island, with all its dangers and mysteries, had become their home, and they were determined to make it a place of hope and resilience. The island, it seemed, was offering them a grim gift, a chance to build their salvation from the bones of those who had perished before them. It was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place of opportunity. The crew, once lost and broken, found a new sense of hope and determination. They were no longer just survivors, they were pioneers, forging a new path in an unforgiving world. As they looked out over the horizon, the crew knew that their journey was far from over. The island had given them a second chance, but it was up to them to make the most of it. They would face many more challenges, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had the tools they needed to survive. The island, with all its dangers and mysteries, had become their home, and they were determined to make it a place of hope and resilience. Days turned into weeks. The crew of the Lady Luck, their initial despair giving way to a grim determination, worked tirelessly, scavenging what they could from the wreckage, using their newfound tools to shape the salvaged wood into a makeshift raft, their every action fueled by the faintest glimmer of hope. The island, as if sensing their change of heart, seemed to soften its demeanour. The screams, though ever present, lost some of their intensity, their relentless chorus fading to a mournful background hum. The fog lifted, revealing the full extent of their prison, a small rocky outcrop with a single stunted tree clinging precariously to its highest point. It was from this vantage point, while scanning the horizon for any sign of a passing ship, that young Thomas, his eyes sharp with youthful optimism, spotted it. A sail. A distant triangle of white against the endless blue, so faint that it could have been a trick of the light, a figment of their collective desire for rescue. "Captain, look!" Thomas cried, his voice hoarse with excitement, pointing a trembling finger towards the horizon. "A ship! I see a ship!" Captain Roberts, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath catching in his throat, scrambled up the rocky slope, his gaze desperately searching the horizon. He had dared to hope, had clung to the belief that somehow, against all odds, they might yet be saved. But after weeks of solitude, of silence, of the relentless whispers of the island, a part of him had come to accept that this was their fate, that they were destined to die on this God-forsaken rock, their bones added to the wreckage that littered the beach. And yet, there it was, a ship, its sails billowing gently in the breeze, its hull cutting through the water with the grace of a seabird, growing larger with every passing moment. It was real. It was not a trick of the light, not a figment of their collective imagination. It was a ship, and it was sailing towards them. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, bloomed in Captain Roberts's chest, spreading through his weary limbs, warming the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He had never been a praying man, not in the traditional sense, but as he watched that distant ship draw closer, he found himself whispering a silent prayer of thanks, a plea for deliverance from this watery purgatory. The journey back to England was a blur. Captain Roberts, his body healed but his spirit scarred, moved through the world like a ghost, his gaze distant, his words few. The familiar sights and sounds of the sea, once a source of comfort and excitement, now held a haunting familiarity. A constant reminder of the horrors he had witnessed, the secrets he now carried within the depths of his soul. He had lost his ship, his crew, his sense of invincibility. He had stared into the abyss, had confronted the darkest depths of his own soul, and had emerged forever changed. The sea, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now whispered of unseen terrors, of the fragility of life, of the capricious nature of fate. He watched the crew of the ship that had rescued them, their laughter carrying across the deck, their faces etched with the carefree joy of men who had never looked death in the eye, and he felt a pang of envy, a longing for a time when the sea held no horrors for him, when the only whispers he heard were those of the wind and the waves. Upon his return to England, Captain Roberts found himself hailed as a hero, a survivor of a maritime disaster of unprecedented scale. The tales of his survival spread like wildfire, capturing the imagination of all who heard them. He was feted in taverns, where the air was thick with the scent of ale and the sound of laughter. His tale recounted with a mixture of awe and disbelief, each listener hanging on his every word, eager to hear the next thrilling detail. his exploits exaggerated with each retelling, but amidst the adulation, the back-patting and the endless toasts, there was a shadow that loomed over him. Captain Roberts felt a growing sense of unease, a gnawing discomfort that he couldn't shake off. A weight settling upon his shoulders that had nothing to do with the loss of his ship or the horrors he had witnessed. It was a burden of a different kind, one that gnawed at his very soul. He wanted to tell them the truth, the real story, the one that haunted his dreams and kept him awake at night. He wanted to tell them about the screams, the shadows, the things that lurked in the darkness, unseen but ever present. The island that was both prison and salvation. A place that had tested his very limits and reshaped his understanding of the world. He wanted to warn them, to share the lessons he had learned the hard way, to shatter the illusion of the sea as a realm of adventure and romance, to reveal its true nature as a place of unimaginable power and unforgiving cruelty. The sea, with its tempestuous waves and hidden dangers, was not the romanticized entity they believed it to be. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by a force he could not explain. It was as if the very act of speaking would unleash something terrible, a knowledge that some truths were too profound, too terrifying to be shared. He wrestled with this inner turmoil, knowing that the truth could change everything. Yet he remained silent, his lips sealed by an invisible force, a fear that the truth would be too much for them to bear. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the skepticism that would greet his revelations, the dismissal in their smiles, the way they would shake their heads in disbelief, convinced that he was merely spinning another yarn. And he realized that they would never believe him, not really. They were too entrenched in their own perceptions, too comfortable with their sanitized version of reality. They preferred their legends neat and tidy, their heroes untarnished by the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world. Their heroes were meant to be paragons of virtue, untouched by the shadows that he had seen. And so Captain Bartholomew Roberts, once a man of action, of unwavering certainty, found himself in a new role, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of truths too dark to be spoken aloud. He became a keeper of secrets, his heart heavy with the burden of truth untold, his soul forever bound to the island that had both broken and remade him. The memories of that place, the things he had seen and experienced, were etched into his very being. He would sail again, for the sea was in his blood, an inseparable part of who he was, but he would never again look upon its vast expanse with the same eyes. The innocence, the sense of wonder had been stripped away, for he had seen what lay beneath the surface, the hidden depths that held both beauty and terror, and that knowledge had changed him forever. The sea, once a source of endless fascination, had become a reminder of the fragility of life and the thin veil that separated the known from the unknown. He was a changed man, his gaze now carrying the weight of the secrets he bore, the burden of truth untold, a heavy mantle that he would carry for the rest of his days.